You ready for a real story? Let's kick back. Bring it.
Kick back. Here we are again. Real people, real stories. And as usual, we have our guest here today who has got a real story. Him and I have known each other for, close to 40 years now. Wouldn't you say that, Jim? Yeah. We all have our personal vault. We put things in and we take things out. Some of those are failures and some of those are successes. So with that, Jim DiNapoli, or James DiNapoli, as he has on his book. Jimmy has quite a background. Him and I have crossed paths and we've had journeys in different careers, and we seem to circle back. And I think because we circle back, we've had a lot of success in our life, and we've had some of those failures, and we shared some of those failures together, and we shared a lot of success together. And sometimes that's how you keep some of your lifelong friendships, and you learn from one another. We've certainly learned from each other, and we've learned from others along the way. Jimmy, first and foremost, is a retired fire chief out in New York, and that's where we're talking to him from. But he's actually in Connecticut at his home. But he spent most of his life in the New York City area and Westchester area of New York. And him and I have had some good times. So with that, James DiNapoli, the new book that's out on Amazon, and that'll be The Bell Tolls, which kind of reflects a little bit of his career as a fireman and as a fire chief. But not just that, but Jimmy also has a background. He's worked in television, music videos, film. He's done everything from selling cell phones in the beginning. I remember the Motorola phone, my first brick phone.
It was about that big.
It was huge. So as you can see, we've got through a lot. Jimmy's done carpentry, sheetrocking. There is an adventure he hasn't gotten into, just like most of us do in life. And career paths, we didn't do well at it. It takes a turn because the chapter's closed and it's time to move on to something new. And he's pretty creative like I am and very entrepreneurial. So even though he spent his big chunk of his life in public service, he still has that entrepreneurial spirit. And that comes through with his new book, The Bell Tolls. Welcome, Jim.
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me. And here we are again, right?
Here we are. Jimmy was with me when we first did the first rendition of Kickback back in the day, 34 years ago. We filmed the show. So we did 22 episodes of that, and Jimmy was the producer of that show, along with a mutual friend of ours, director Howard Zeidman, and director Rick Schaffo, who both spent much of their time with ABC television and NBC and a host of other areas. So let's go talk about The Bell Tolls. What inspired you to write this book, other than just being a fireman?
Well, there's a lot behind it, and even though it's a fictitious story, it's rooted in real life firefighter experiences. The most important one is the trauma that public service people experience throughout their career. I watched an interview once, and not so long ago, actually, and the guy was teaching a class, I guess it was a psychology class, and he said, on average, the average person experiences between 4 and 8 traumatic events in the span of their lifetime.
Right.
However, he said first responders average in a lifetime, in their career, they average anywhere from 800 to 1,000 traumatic events. And
that's true. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. And as well, it's like, you go through a 30-year career and you almost cruise through it on autopilot. You see the things you see, you do the things you do, and one day, somehow, it'll all catch up to you. And each person's different, so it happens in different ways. But what moved me in this direction was, in the 25 years nearly since 9/11, there's been a lot of tragedy that has unfolded for first responders that most people don't see. And recently, in a year or two prior to me writing this book, I knew a couple of guys who took their own life. Dealing
Which is
with
pretty
things
common
that,
at first responders, yeah.
Right. And, dealing or trying to deal with things that, are just too much. And I started to look at what is it like to the average person when they see on the news, they see a news report of, police officer shot. And as we sit here today, I read that Las Vegas Metro lost an officer today.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
Yeah. And, when you see a big fire on TV, they tell you 5 firefighters hurt. And people say, oh, praying for that person. But that's not the end of it for that person. It's a life-changing event. And it's a very long road, if ever, where someone comes back completely from that. And so I wanted to write a story about that. I had no real direction. I had no real thought. I just was going to start writing. I always wanted to write a book for many, many years. It's one of my passions. And I said, let me do it.
Right. And
So
people don't realize when it comes to first responders, it's a roller coaster, like you talked about, and the traumas that people feel. They go through that. The average person, 4 to 8 traumatic events, and then you have a first responder that's doing in a lifetime of a career, could be 1,000, because you don't know on any given day, like sadly happened to that officer here in Las Vegas. Any given day, something can change, and you don't know what you're responding to, whether it be a fire or a police call or whatever it may be, and what you're going to get to, because we never go into it thinking I'm going to be that one, or the person next to me might be that one. So you're taking that trauma, even as a partner, or in your case, a fire chief for one of your men.
Right. I mean, when you have a job where you have no idea what's happening 10 seconds from now, that's a big thing that a lot of people, don't understand. It's like you go to work every day, whether you're a cop and you put on a badge and a gun, or a firefighter, it's like you don't know what that day is going to be like, And I remember going back, I was a lieutenant working on the truck, and we worked 24-hour shifts, right?
Right.
And, we would average anywhere between maybe 3 to 10 calls in a 24-hour shift. It varies. But this one particular shift stuck out of my mind. And we do first response EMS. So when you get a cardiac arrest call, we go too. And in this 24-hour period, and I didn't even think about it till like a while after, but in that 24-hour period, aside from the regular calls we went on, I had 4 cardiac arrests that we couldn't save in a 24-hour period. I lost 4 people.
That's a lot to digest. Yeah.
Yeah. And, by the time the shift was over, I was like, wow, that was a bad tour, and unfortunately 4 people didn't survive. And, we usually have a pretty good success rate with cardiac arrests of bringing people back, and over the course of my career, I can't tell you how many, dozens and dozens and dozens of people that we successfully revived and went on to live their lives. But you can't save everybody. When you have 4 in one 24-hour shift, it kind of leaves a mark, and it's things like that, that the average person doesn't understand about what first responders endure. And so it made me want to write this book. And that's kind of how it was born.
Sure. And people don't realize that those 4 traumatic events, those cardiac arrests you're talking about, you don't get over that immediately. That carries with you for other shifts, or even sometimes for years, because you remember that day like you did now. You say, it just dawns on me what a bad shift I've had. And, that carries and it builds up, because now you have other events that happen after that day. And now that compounds, and that's a lot to digest. That's a lot to regurgitate. And for the most part, we as first responders keep that inside for the most part until it really builds up. And unfortunately, in first responders, suicide is a big thing, and admitting that you have some issues, probably dealing with some of these events, to talk to somebody is even harder. So a book like yours, I've read it, and reminded me of a lot of things that he had challenges with, and seeing other people had when they go through something, their family goes through it, their children, their coworkers, even their neighbors. And you outlined that beautifully in this book.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I mean, it affects more than just yourself, and that's the other side of it. I had started out as a volunteer fireman in a city called Mount Vernon in New York. And the way I got introduced to the fire service was, it was around 1980. I was dating a girl back then who, her girlfriend was dating a guy that was a volunteer fireman. And I didn't even know what
Right.
that was back then. I was into rock and roll music, and we went on a double date with them. And my girlfriend and I were sitting in the back seat of his car, and all of a sudden I hear this thing beeping, and he pulls out a blue light and he throws it on the dashboard, and we take off. And I'm like,
Right. Yeah. What volunteers do. Yeah.
yeah, I'm looking at my girlfriend. I'm like, what are we doing? And she's like, well, he's a volunteer fireman. And I'm like, what is that? You know, I had no idea
Right.
that you could be a volunteer fireman. I had older relatives, cousins, and a grandfather that was a firefighter, but I never knew that there was any. We go to this call, and I'm like, I was mesmerized by the whole thing. And when he got back in the car and it was over, I was like, you know, what do you do? And he's like, oh, yeah, I'm a volunteer. And he's like, are you interested? You want to join? And I was like, mean like that? Like you join? Like I didn't know what the process was. A long story short, I joined, and once I got involved, I was like, wow. I mean, it hit me like this is where I'm supposed to be, you know.
Well, you want to help out. You have the, you know, that inside of you to be somebody who stepped forward to help out in the community. And, you know, it obviously was an interest to you, but for the most part, you have that a personality that says, you know, I'm going to give somebody some help, even if it's for free, which is what a majority of firefighters out there are volunteers that people don't realize.
And so I did that for a couple of years. And then I says, well, you know what, I'd like to do this as a career. So I started looking into taking tests for different departments to become a paid fireman, you know. And I took New York City, FDNY, I took City of Yonkers and a bunch of other ones. And, you know, it's not a quick process. So, you know, it took a couple of years before I got called for the job. And then that was in 1988. And, you know, once I started, I'd never looked back. You know, it was just felt like this is where I'm supposed to be, you know. And
yeah. And over the years, as much as I've talked to you, you've always loved the job. I mean, we've talked about the fire service and I watched your career from the day you started all the way through to your retirement. I mean, there's never a lull in your excitement or your love for what you did.
Right. I mean, it's not to say I never had a bad day at work, like, you know, the 4 cardiac arrests, but right. But all in all, I mean, I couldn't have imagined myself doing anything else. I mean, if I could be 25 years old again, I'd go back and do it all over again in a heartbeat. You know, that's how much I loved doing what I did. And so years back, there was a book written by a New York City fireman named Dennis Smith. He became a New York Times bestseller. He got on the New York City Fire Department in the late 60s when the entire planet of the 5 boroughs was like burning down. You know, there was never a time in the country where there was more fires than they call them the war years from like the late 60s through the 70s and into the early 80s. And he wrote a book called Report from Engine Company 82 and read the book. And I was just completely mesmerized by the way he told the story. Now, having, you know, being a fireman myself, you know, I had the inside knowledge, but it was the actual art of telling that story in pages of a book that fascinated me because I felt like I was there, you know. And so I had wanted to start writing, and this was back in the mid-90s. And what actually turned out being the first 4 chapters of my book was 17 pages that I had written back in the mid-90s as a short story, just wanting to try my hand at writing.
Sure, yeah.
And I put that in a box somewhere, and all the times I moved over the years, it was buried there. And one day, a couple of years ago, I was looking for tapes, that project you and I were working on, and I stumbled across it in a box, and I had completely forgot about it. And I was like, wow. And so that was what started me on this path to write. I took those 17 pages and continued and wrote this book.
Yeah, you just never know. And again, you stuffed something into your vault, which was 17 pages of a short story in a way. And it was in your vault. And when the time came for you to withdraw from that vault, you started picking up again where you left off. And it just shows the importance that even if you have an idea or a thought and you stuff it away somewhere, it doesn't mean that's the end of it. I mean, not everything that we put in our vault is meant to be taken out, but there are things there and you can pick and choose. And that's the glory of it. You know, the more you stuff in there, the more options you have down the road, like you did when you retired.
Right. And, you know, it's funny using that analogy, you know, the vault, it's kind of like I put it in a safety deposit box for 30 something years.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what we do.
And I couldn't have written it if I didn't have that 30 years of experiences. It all worked out. I think it was for a reason. I put that away, and then I went through my whole career, and then I had all these experiences, all these things that,
Right.
I brought into my vault. And then that's finding it again and having all that, those experiences is what it enabled me to write the book.
Exactly. And then one of those big experiences that you have, we both shared, and we're going to talk about 9/11. You were a fireman in New York when 9/11 happened, and I had the opportunity, being in Las Vegas, I was selected as part of the law enforcement contingency from out here to help out. And you actually met me out there during 9/11 when I was doing my work, mostly at the Staten Island area, sifting through the rubble that they collected. But
Right.
you were there
The
the
Fresh
first
Kills
day.
landfill.
Yeah, you were there the first day it happened.
Yeah. And so that's another story in and of itself, because of the several things I've done throughout my life in conjunction with being a firefighter on my days off was I worked for ABC television in
Right.
Midtown Manhattan. And it just so happened that day I was going to work in Manhattan. I was down in the subway system when the whole thing first started, and I had no idea what was going on. And I came up out of the subway system on I think it was West 75th Street or 7th Street in Broadway.
Right.
And, back then the cell service in the subways was kind of sketchy.
Oh, yeah,
Nowadays
yeah.
you can make phone calls down in the subway tracks, but not then. So as soon as I got up to street level, my phone started ringing, and, a buddy of mine from the firehouse called me, and he's like screaming into the phone because he knew I was going to be in Manhattan.
Right.
And I'm like, what are you talking about? And like everybody he thought it was a little plane, that pilot.
Like a Cessna or something like that. Yeah.
Right. But the way he was carrying on, as he's talking to me, I hear sirens everywhere. And then I noticed I could hear helicopters hovering, so all the news helicopters were hovering
Right.
above, the Hudson River, taking live shots of the Trade Center. By at this point, both towers had already been hit. So I ran and I went into the ABC television where I worked. In the lobby, they had a TV on, and everybody on the whole show was in the lobby staring at the television.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
And I turned, and I looked up and I was like, whoa. So, after the towers collapsed, I was able to get through to my firehouse and
Right.
found out that they were on their way down. And I was able to get a hold of one of the guys on the truck, and I said, hey, pick me up. I'm in Midtown Manhattan, which they did. And we wound up down there. We were there till I think 1 or 2 in the morning the following day.
That's crazy. And I was there for the aftermath. I couldn't imagine the day of. I mean, when you were describing it to me, when we had spoken, when you told me that story, and I knew I was on my way out there at some point, that was surreal in itself, but hearing it from you and then connecting that when I got there was even more of an emotional drain and an emotional dump. I lost a good buddy of mine from college who was, he was a firefighter that was in the towers. I lost an uncle there too. So that was, to me, all that compounded. It was like, wow, I didn't even realize when I got there what was really going on. It still didn't process. So I couldn't imagine for you what that process was like.
Yeah, it was surreal, like you said. I mean, it was hard to process. There was a point later in that evening, where I was standing down right about, I don't know, maybe 150 feet from where the towers were. And I was talking to a couple of New York City cops, and we were just like watching them pour water on. I mean, there were buildings burning everywhere, like free burning. It's like nobody was even paying attention to those at one point, because there was just so much destruction that, you didn't know where to begin, And so I remember saying to one of the cops, I was like, it just doesn't even look real, And he's like, yeah, I know. It's like, I felt like I was watching it on a big screen TV,
Yeah, I have to say that because when I got down to the actual site, one day they brought us over on the NYPD boat from Staten Island to Manhattan, and we got off there. It was almost like I was on a movie set. It didn't become real. I mean, it was like people were standing behind barricades and they're watching first responders, and it's like you're looking around at the smoldering and the smoke and the destruction. It doesn't click. It really doesn't. It's like you're on an autopilot.
Yeah. And it's just like your mind, you can't process it all. Like right away. Otherwise, I guess it would just be too overwhelming. But a couple of the things that stuck out to me was like there had to be 4 or 5 thousand like firemen and cops there in that area, and
Right.
it was just it was so quiet. You could hear a pin drop. Like with all that destruction and all those people, and the ash on the ground was probably about 6 or 8 inches thick, and it was like a fresh snowfall, when you go outside in the
Right.
snow
Right.
and everything's like really quiet. And I remember that sticking out in my mind, how like eerily quiet everything was.
And
Um,
that's what's kind of eerie, because even when I got there, it was that you're right. That I just thought about that now. The quiet atmosphere. You knew stuff was going on. Trucks are moving around, first responders, but it was pretty quiet. I mean, it is almost like you could hear a pin drop.
yeah. I mean, it was just like such a solemn atmosphere. Every first responder I looked at, you could see the weight of it in their face.
Right. Right.
So, yeah, I mean, so those are the things that, first responders endure, and then carry it through your whole life. And some guys, some women and some men as first responders, they don't win that battle. I mean, we all know probably somebody who suffers from that, whether you're a
Right.
military
Right.
veteran, or a first responder. And so I just wanted to write a story. I mean, again, it's a fictitious character, but it's based on the emotion of real stories and real experiences that I've witnessed over the 35 years.
And I can say that, I have the book right here. There we go. And I enjoyed reading this. I could tell you, reading this book, the emotion that was in there that I could see as a first responder, and seeing what was written in here, unlike, and it doesn't put down movies and other books that may have been written, but from a fictitious side. But the story about Tom Sullivan is about all of us are in Tom Sullivan. That's one thing I got from this, is that whether you're a military veteran, EMT, fire, police, you name it, if you read this book, you see parts of yourself in there and you can relate to it on almost every level. So it was amazing when I read this that I got that from the book. It was everything that I see and hear and have gone through. You really do get a connection to it.
Well, thank you. Yeah. And I mean, that was my goal. It was like I didn't want to write the book so that it was that only firemen could relate to it. I wanted to
Right.
specifically make it so that, anyone, and especially people outside of our world, the first responders, would be able to relate to it. And that's why I focused a lot on his family, in the story, so that there was a relationship there. And before I published the book, I had given it to a few women that I know, in our
Right.
age range, who had no real understanding of the fire service. And I asked them if they'd be interested in reading it, just to get their perspective.
Sure. Feedback. Yeah. Constructive feedback and so forth.
Yeah. And, I had an overwhelmingly great, response from them, and that was rewarding. A first responder would lose interest. So I was trying to find that balance in the story to keep everybody interested. And I feel like I've achieved that. And then the feedback kind of supports that. So,
No, you have, because I noticed the family element in there, and you brought up a good point. When you're reading this, even if you're not a first responder, if you read this on the family context, it really does relate to a lot of people who go through some family strife or some job problems and home life problems, and even going through somebody who's gotten an injury, even if they're not a first responder, dealing with somebody who's gotten an injury where it's a life-altering injury, and it not only life alters them on a physical level, it life alters them on a mental and psychological level that's very hard for family members to navigate. And so it's really, what struck to me was when I read this, is it's not just about a fireman or a first responder. It's overall about family and the family structure, and how everybody comes together at the same time, how people kind of drift apart a little bit during that, and how do they weave that back together. So
right. And so it's relatable to just about everybody. And that was what I was trying to, accomplish. And I think it did. So,
No, you did. So with that, in the realm of first responders, you've seen a lot. You've been retired for a few years now. What is the feeling then, having been a fireman, and what do you see now when it comes to public regard? Let's go that. Let's touch on that a little bit about perception, public regard towards first responders. We know that firemen get treated a little different than police officers or
Yeah.
military. But what do you, from your perspective?
Well, I mean, we've always kind of been given a backstage pass, like
Right.
firefighters. I've come across some people in my career that, haters are going to hate. Doesn't matter what you do.
Sure. No matter what you do.
But generally, we've always been welcomed, across the board. I mean, after 9/11, everybody loved firemen and cops after 9/11. And sadly, here we are tiptoeing up to the 25th anniversary. And, there has been a change on that, for a
Exactly.
variety of reasons. The culture, right now in this country is so divided. And so, I don't even know that we're at the precipice of it. I think that firefighters are still, I think, kind of adored, I guess you could say, in a way, because,
Right.
every kid loves, firemen, and, you're going to rescue their cat out of the tree, or you're going to come and save them.
Right.
Obviously police have a lot going on right now. It's tough time in this country to be a police officer.
Military person, as a police officer or military, you're more on the offensive. I mean, as a police officer, you're either citing somebody with a ticket for doing something wrong, or you're arresting somebody or their family member. A fireman doesn't have to go through that, but I could tell you, been on enough calls with firemen, they sometimes get the secondary effect of that, and even though the fireman's trying to help them with an injury or with, don't touch me, don't do this, don't do that. And I've even had firemen been told, I'm going to come after you when I get out. And I'm looking at, what did the fireman do? So you guys get that by default sometimes,
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's been firefighters that have been shot, and killed by people that, have issues. It's few and far between, thankfully. But, over the course of my career, more often than not, we were there to help. People understood that. Generally, they would accept whatever we were trying to do for them. And we weren't so much having to deal with, people in a bad light, So, but it's out there. It's out there.
Yeah. I think maybe it came more probably when you had to deal with, let's say, for instance, the 4 cardiac arrests where they didn't make it. You're basically the doctor on scene, and everybody wants their loved one to be saved. And they think that you're going to be the one that injects them or does the chest compressions or puts them on some sort of machine that automatically makes them come to life or come back to life. And so did you feel that some of the anger when things didn't go their way or your way when you're trying to do that?
Well, not particularly, because as EMTs, first responders, even as firefighters, we don't have the ability to stop administering care. Once we start, we're committed. So even if we knew the person wasn't making it, we weren't getting them back, we would never let the family think that. We would continue working on them all the way, on the stretcher into the ambulance, so that at least the family had some hope that their loved one, was going to survive.
Right.
And then unfortunately, they would find out at the hospital that wasn't the case. But, we would never give up. We would always keep working the person and hope, because people have come back, even though we've shocked them 3 or 4 times and you don't get a rhythm back.
Right.
But doesn't mean it can't happen. So you never give up. Only a doctor in the emergency room, can make that call when to stop.
Right. I could say firsthand, and, working with firefighters, they don't give up. I mean, they do everything that's humanly possible. And a team of them, I mean, there's this 4 or 5 guys or women working on these people, and they're not giving up. They're putting 100% in. They're doing what they can. And sometimes when you think all is lost, all of a sudden they get that faint pulse. And it's almost like everybody wants to cheer, even though we're not there yet sometimes. Just getting them on the paramedic vehicle or the rig, is a win, because now you can at least get them to a hospital for the doctors to take over and then bring that pulse back stronger. So yeah, when you think all is lost, sometimes you guys come through and do something that, wow, I thought this person was not going to make it.
Right. And, I always used to say, like, you're never doing CPR in the best of circumstances. And what I mean by that is it's always usually like 90 degrees in the room.
Right,
The room's cluttered. You're stepping over each other. I don't think a lot of people, if you've never given CPR to someone, realize how strenuous it is. And so you're trying your best to keep going,
right.
and, you're rotating with, switching off, and who's trying to give them oxygen, who's doing compressions.
Right.
Then you try to get them, packaged up and get them on a stretcher. And, it's sometimes it's 30, 40 minutes of grueling, physical activity before you can hand them off to the paramedics, and, and they go in the ambulance. So it's those calls probably are some of the most strenuous calls I've been on,
There are people out there that have the opportunity to take CPR or first aid. How important in your mind is it that people do as much as they can to learn about first aid, administering it, CPR? I know not everybody likes to be in that position of having to save somebody. It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of, am I doing it right? It's a lot of, what are other people thinking of me doing it? As fire service, you guys do a lot of classes, not only for other first responders like officers, but you do it for the public. What do you think? Do more people need to get involved in this and just to learn and know that they could be the next person saving somebody in a restaurant or in a hallway or even on a bus or a subway?
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously, the more people that are trained properly in CPR, the better. And we've done that. We've hosted classes for civilian groups through the Chamber of Commerce, and we've offered that learning to anyone who wants to do it, and, if you're alone with your family and God forbid you have, of course you can go to your local Red Cross chapter or, your YMCA. A lot of places will offer that. It's a couple of nights, for you to learn how to do it. And once you're trained in that, it's the difference between life and death for somebody. The quicker you start compressions and you keep the blood flow going through the body, the better the survivability rate is,
Right. Especially during holiday season, families get together and I've noticed, over the years that it's a lot of stuff happens around holidays, and,
right.
Illnesses or sicknesses or cardiac arrests, sometimes that many people in a gathering, and they're all paralyzed on what to do sometimes. And thankfully, a lot of the ones I've come across, there was somebody there that knew CPR or a dispatcher would coach them through it, the CPR to keep them going until you all showed up.
Right. And that's a good point you bring up, because I think every dispatcher, police and fire dispatchers, trained how to verbally instruct someone over the phone.
Absolutely.
How to administer CPR. And that in and of itself, if you think about it, really further illustrates the importance of it, because if you can have a person who has no idea how to do it and a dispatcher can talk them through it and have them administer it, it may not be picture perfect to the way we're taught to do it,
right?
But it shows further to the point that something is better than nothing,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even if it buys you 10 more seconds until first responders get there, that's 10 more seconds that were valuable in that moment. And,
right. And the thing that makes a difference too, in those circumstances is, when it's one of your loved ones, there's an emotional, component to it, obviously. So for us as first responders, you're not emotionally attached to the person, so you're pretty focused on your job, but when you're doing it on a family member, it's a whole different ballgame. And I remember, not that I wanted to remember this, but, all the years that I had been doing that, I lost my mom some years ago, and she was in a assisted living, and her health had been declining, and she had a bunch of close calls leading up to this day. And I had just gotten into my office, and I sat down at my desk to get started on my computer for the day, and my phone rings, and the number comes up. It's It's the assisted living facility. And I just knew right then and there, I knew what it was.
Oh.
And I answered the phone and they said, hi, your mom's in cardiac arrest and we're doing CPR on her, but we're not sure, so I was out the door and, I had my Chiefs
Yeah.
car, like lights and sirens. I literally got to the place in, 6 minutes, I think. And I get there and here I am, 30 some odd years in the fire service. And I go in
Right.
a room, she's surrounded by, staff there doing CPR and everything. And medics are there and everything. And now here I am, I'm on the other side of the whole ball game, right?
Yeah.
Watching my mother get CPR and and that gave me a lot of, compassion. Like I said, you're on autopilot as a first responder. You don't have
Right.
that emotional attachment to the person you're trying to help. But when you're on that side of it and it is someone you love, it's a whole different ball game. And so we always try to like really be compassionate and caring and, for the family, in those
Right.
instances,
Yeah. It's,
so.
you see something happen as a first responder to somebody close to you, it kind of changes your psyche in a way, because even though you're trained to do certain things, the emotions sometimes will kind of skew that a little bit. You're not thinking like a first responder anymore. So it's tough to flip those roles. It's tough, but yeah, I could certainly see that when you go into those things. For a lot of people that have family that suffer something, even if they're first responders themselves, they probably go through the same thing that you're describing with your mother.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, there's a duality there, which like goes back to why I wrote this book. It's like, yeah, we're first responders, police, fire, and EMS, but we're people, you know. And as much as you try to handle and process all the things that you encounter over the course of your career, you're still a human being, and
Right.
somewhere along the line, it catches up to you somehow, and I think I've been pretty fortunate. I made it through my career, knock wood, relatively unscathed, I think, physically. But yeah, and this book helped me with that. Like writing a story about it is also therapeutic, for me,
Absolutely. Absolutely. You
and I enjoyed the writing process, yes, but I also enjoyed the creativity and the outlet that it gave me, for those emotions, to put them into a book.
right. And I think that you keyed on one thing is the aftermath. A lot of people who leave being a first responder, not just them, but their family in a way also retires from it, because they're going with you on that journey when you've ended that career. Now they're shifting how you end that career, and for them as a family member of somebody in that career. So it's an aftermath for not just yourself, but everybody around you. And how important is it in what you just described, and that you had something to pull out of your vault to go to right after you retired, which was to focus on writing a book and to be creative.
Right. Right.
You know,
And it was all there. I just had to find it again and bring it out and put it into, and make sense of it in pages of a book. It really was therapeutic for me as well to write this story.
do you find people that you've worked with not having that plan or aftermath after they retire, where they have something to pull out of their own vault that they can go to, whether it be like I have a cousin who retired from NYPD, and he's a woodworker and he's doing some fantastic work. Shout out to my cousin Frankie. He's done a great job with woodworking, and now he makes it for all types of people who have different ideas of what they want. And it's beautiful and it keeps him busy. Do you see people that you've worked with or that have not had that ready to go when they retired?
Yeah. Yes, actually both. I mean, and I know a number of guys who in retirement have found their second wind, for
Right.
lack of a better term, where they, like you said, your cousin did woodworking. And I know guys who've gone on and, developed second careers and, and found a place for themselves after the fire service, myself included. But do I miss it? Yeah, sure, I miss it. But, I'm at a point in my life
Right.
now where climbing up and down a ladder fire truck. I don't even clean my gutters, the leaves. I get my stepson to do it. I used to run around on ladders and roofs, and it's like,
Right.
not now. I keep my feet on the ground.
Yeah, I get it.
But I found an outlet, in other ways, to be creative and to do something. But I've also seen guys that, they get lost, they retire from the job and their whole identity was who they were in those years through their career. And then suddenly they don't know who they are anymore,
Exactly.
And,
yeah.
and that's a dangerous thing because, depression and, alcoholism and all these things, and like I said, I've known a few guys, one fairly recently, with health challenges and depression.
Staying active is so important. I think, there's a lot of a correlation between first responders and creativity, even in the entertainment field. You have a lot of first responders that spent time either before getting in the entertainment field, like people like Steve Buscemi, or, who's with, NY, with the FDNY, and you had people like Eddie Money, the singer who was at NYPD. And then you have some who were in entertainment that do both, like Bobby Sherman, and, actors going back to Beaver with Ken Osmond, became a police officer in LA and even got shot in the line of duty. So there's a correlation, I think, between, those. Dennis Farina, he retired from Chicago PD and became a well-known actor. There's a lot of correlation. I can go on and on with those who've been in entertainment and in first responders. So it seems to be a
David
big correlation.
Roth.
Yeah.
The lead singer from Van Halen, after his, crazy career as a rock star, became a New York City paramedic for a number of years.
That's right. That's right. Some guys go out there and they do it for, they become reserves in firework or reserves in police work. Like, Eric Estrada did that. He still has his reserve status, I believe. I got a chance to talk to him about that. But there seems to be a connection between being a first responder and having that creativity level either before, during, and after. And I think that, I haven't put my finger on it yet, but I think that creativity comes from that, we have to think on the spot and we have to be creative on the spot and come up with ideas on the spot in order to tackle a situation.
Right. There's a lot of energy focused in making those decisions, split seconds decisions that, you have to find that ability in you, and whether you want to call it creativeness or whatever, you have to find that in a moment's notice. And so there's a lot of energy produced in those moments. And, some guys just don't handle the deceleration, if you want to call it that, that adrenaline for all those years in being a first responder and then kind of, shutting that switch off and all that energy, where's it go, And sometimes it just manifests in a bad way, unfortunately.
Sure. I guess from an entertainer's standpoint, you tell your story, whether it's via a book, you do a podcast, or you write a film or a TV series or whatever it may be, or you do it through music. You're singing through those experiences in life and you just change some of the names in the song and so forth. But there's metaphors in that song that go back to possibly things that happened during that career. So I think there's, like you said, there's some sort of way to make it an outlet for not bottling up a lot of that emotion and tension and so forth.
Right. You look at musicians, there's a lot of criticism when you see bands, like Kiss and the Rolling Stones, in their 70s and 80s, they're still out there, but that's who they are. That's their life force. That's their creativity, and you can't just shut that off without some type of ramification. And I remember, you remember the rock band ELP, Emerson, Lake and Palmer?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so Keith Emerson, who was the keyboard player in that band, he wound up, he had arthritis in his hands. And he couldn't play anymore. And he wound up taking his own life because he suffered from depression about not being able to do, his creativity, And so, nobody's immune to it. We're all getting older and, we all find our limitations, but sometimes you have to redirect, and you have to find something else. Like you and I, here we are again, Yeah,
absolutely. We go full circle and you brought up a good point because we all see people like Frankie Valli, 94 years old, still singing. And then you see Barry Manilow out there, in his 80s
Tony
still
Bennett.
singing. Tony Bennett, and everybody sees a comment, you know, not to say, mean stuff, but they're making these comments and it's like, hold on a second. Yeah, they might not sound like they used to be. They might not move the way they used to be. But if they're having fun up there and people are paying to see that fun and they want to reminisce, even if it doesn't sound exactly the same, what is the harm in that? Let them be them. I remember going to see George Jones before George Jones passed away. And I could tell you, he's had a hectic and a very controversial career with the drinking, the drugs, and so forth. But when I saw him on stage, it looked like a little kid playing for the first time. I mean, he was having so much fun up there. I was on the front row seat watching George Jones, and he sounded great to me. But what got me was the fact that he was performing like it was the greatest day in his life. And to me, that kind of been a light bulb moment about some of these older performers out there that, they're having their fun. And if you don't want them to have their fun or see that, then don't go to the show or turn the music on. But if you're seeing them online having that fun, well, just cheer it on, because you know what? You're going to be at that age one day and you're going to want to do some of the things you love to do. You want someone to cheer you on still doing something. I mean, I ride horses daily. There'll be a day I can't get up on a horse, but one of my mentors, Hub Hubble, was in his 90s when he was still riding a horse. Or William Shatner still rides a horse at 95. I want to be that William Shatner with my horses,
Yeah.
So I cheer on William Shatner. Hey, great job. Show us that you still have the energy and do it.
It's who you are. It's your passion, and you can't fault them for still wanting to be creative, and that's their life force, A lot of people, that can't continue doing what they love. Going back to your original, question, it's like, when you spend all these years doing something like that, and I can tell you, it was my passion. I was just having this conversation with my wife in the car the other day. I was driving her to the airport, and my wife, for those who don't know, is also a retired firefighter.
Right. Yes, she is.
And, we talk about the job often and what we miss about it. I said, if I could be a young man again, I'd do it in a heartbeat, all over again. It's literally was the best job I ever had, and I've done a lot of things, as we know each other a long time, and I enjoy those too. I love working in production, whether it's television or film production, that creativity there. I love it. Writing, whatever it is, that's all part of who I am, my DNA, and I'm going to do it as long as I can.
Absolutely. And then, like you said, you love your career so much, but now you take what you've done in all those years and you're able to take that energy and move it into something else. In this case, writing a book, getting back into film and television production, reconnecting the dots, which is what I've done myself, and doing it with you is even better because, you look back 34 years ago when we first did Kickback, and now here we are 34 years later and we're doing a podcast, and then we're starting to do some other projects now and some short films and other films. And it's kind of fun, that we could do, we could pull back from our vault, both of us at the same time, and say, okay, we both have this in there. Let's get this going again. And, I'm glad I stuck it there.
Picked up where we left off.
Absolutely. Except you still have more hair than I do. There you go.
Yeah, I've been blessed. I can't complain, being in my 60s and still I get a lot of looks from guys without hair.
Yeah.
But, going back to when I came out to see you that time out in Vegas, and we went and had lunch at that restaurant in the casino. I mean, we laughed for 2 hours about, all the things we've done over the years, and like that energy and that, that inspiration, felt to me the same as it did all those years ago. Like, let's just do this again. Let's go, man. Let's get back on the horse.
Absolutely. And that's, and not only that, but we've talked to a number of people over the years that we worked with and reconnected them as well, because giving them some of that motivation, people we've known in the entertainment business, and making those phone calls and saying, hey, we're back. We're at it again. And they're like, sure. Okay. Let's count me in. I'm on board. So
I know
it's great to reconnect with that. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there is a lot to be said for having that ability to be creative, even if it's in woodworking, doing something entertainment wise, writing a book, man, just go out and learn how to sail a boat, take a basic sailboat lesson, or go out and take up, shooting at a gun range. It's a great stress release, and you improve yourself as you go, and you learn about something new if you've never done it. I tell people all the time, it's good to have many different things to, get some of that energy out instead of sitting on the
Yep.
couch watching TV and wishing things. One thing I can say is, and you probably agree on this, just to wish something into manifestation or wish something into becoming or willing it's going to happen. It doesn't work that way. And you know that firsthand,
You got to take action, and I'm playing golf 1 or 2 days a week, and I'm having a blast. I mean, I wish I was better, but still, I play with a great bunch of guys, and we call it the senior tour. But we're out there, we're having a great time, and I played this morning,
Absolutely.
and it's just a great feeling to challenge yourself, and maybe someday I'll get the hang of it, but it's still fun. It's still better.
This goes for people who are young as well, and I'm sure you've had talks with folks. Even if you're not retiring from a job, or even if you're not somebody who is at the chapter of life, even if you're starting out and you're young at 18, 20, 25 years old, or 30, get involved in as many things as you can, because you have to put some things into that vault. Even if it's something you may not use later on, get that skill. I spoke to her, the last guest was Eric Deloge, and he talked about, he's won a Grammy, he's won a Tony Award, but in that time, he also was a chef. He learned how to cook. He's built homes. He's designed homes.
Creativity.
I mean,
yeah.
And he did that in between tours, some of the rock tours he did with some of the biggest names out there. But he still had other things that he wanted to do in life. And that is, I'm going to learn how to do homes, how to build a house. I'm going to learn how to be a chef. And he went to culinary school for it. So, I mean,
Right.
Even if you have something going on, great, keep something else going at the same time, because you can't put everything into one thing. You get burned out from it.
Yeah. I long before I was a fireman, we all have to work and earn money. And, I grew up in a relatively, poor family. My dad was a World War II veteran, and he was an auto mechanic, and we never had a new car. We had secondhand furniture, whatever. I mean,
right.
I'm not playing the violin here. I'm just stating what it was. And so, I had to go out and pretty much earn a living myself from an early age, which was fine. And it taught me a lot, and I wound up getting into the construction trade, and there's a creativity there, and I learned a lot, and I did a lot of, manual labor work in, when I was a young guy. Thankfully I did it then, when you can do it. And, and I learned a lot. And then shortly after I retired, one of the first things I did was I did remodeling work in my own house. I a new deck, and I rearranged I opened up the whole floor
yourself.
plan, Yeah. And that was, like a 7-8 months of continual work. And, and that's a creativity outlet too, and I enjoyed it. And I wouldn't do it now, but, but that's the thing. You got to find those things. I had all that knowledge in my vault from my early days, my early 20s. And, I went back and pulled it out and used it, and, and did some creative work and made my house nicer,
Absolutely. And I think you did that with a mutual friend of ours, the Nigro brothers.
Yes.
Yes. And, that was a construction family back in New York. And so, you have friends that do something, they bring you in, they have you learn on the job, and you start building for them. And then you start doing those side things, whether you have a full career going, you keep some other things on the side, keep it healthy. For you, it's always doing construction, or at the time you're doing cell phones for a while, driving a car for somebody, and picking people up at the airport, things like that.
Right.
Like me, if I didn't have horses in my life, all my life, especially during a career, I wouldn't have that outlet. It gave me a sanctuary, gave me something to focus on other than myself and my needs, and I'm taking care of all these horses and that I own and riding them. It's, whether you're riding a horse or riding a bike or getting in a kayak every day, do something with the energy. Volunteer as a fireman. They're looking for people every day. Be a volunteer at an animal shelter. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do it, to get the energy and learn something new, or go after something you always want to do.
Yeah. 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 Life is, an evolution, and, you just
Good way
have
to
to
put it.
keep reinventing yourself,
That's a
and
good
that's,
way to put it. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
People have a hard time at reinventing because, as you and I know, change is hard. Taking on something new is scary. And sometimes going back to the stuff you used to do is scary.
Yeah.
I think I see that in people too. It's like, hold on a second, you have a talent for something, utilize it. And it's like they're scared of a talent that they already have. And I've seen that with a few people I've met.
Yeah. You made me think of something. It's my daughter. She always teases me because, I tell her about all these things that I'm doing, and she just shakes her head and she's like, what haven't you done? She's like, and every time I tell her another story, she's like, I didn't know that about you. It's
Right.
like, I go, well, some things I've forgotten, I have to
Sure.
think back,
Exactly.
but, I think to myself, yeah, I've tried a lot of things, but I don't have any regrets.
History is part of what makes us who we are, and the jobs that we did make us who we are. Even if they were horrible jobs, even if they were bad jobs, it still, it helped mold you.
Yeah.
And the bad jobs only make it so, hey, I'm never going to do that again. How do I motivate myself not to get in a job at doing that again? So
right. Well,
I think
it's funny you say that, because sometimes life pushes you in a different direction because maybe you weren't meant to stay where you were. Maybe you were meant to become something
Right.
else. And I put that message in the book, with the
Right.
character and what he goes through. It's like sometimes, recovery doesn't mean returning to who you were. Sometimes it's who you were
Right.
meant to become, And so if people think about that sometimes, maybe these bumps in life, these things that happen to us are meant for us to, go in a different direction, and sometimes we struggle, like you said, we don't like change, I can't do this anymore, but I'm going to try hard. Well, maybe it's to point you in a different direction, be open to that. That's all,
Absolutely. Everything's a building block. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who are motivational speakers or life coaches. Everything's part of the foundation. But, if you put it in terms of like architecture, you have a house you build, the house becomes old, but then instead of destroying that house, just build a new part onto that house. You're remodeling your house. You're adding new wings on. You're getting creative because
Right.
that old structure is still part of who you are, and you just need to remodel it. You need to rebuild it. You need to add on to it,
And give it new life.
Yeah, absolutely. A fresh coat, for the most part. So with your book, are you looking to hopefully see this made into a movie, since we talk about entertainment and all that stuff? I mean, I read it and I was thinking, like an entertainer or someone in production business, I'm like, wow, this would be a great movie. Great story.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think of it that way, but there's enough, in this subject matter, that someone should make it into a movie, I guess, like where it would, where more people could be, experience it, the message. I mean, I just was happy to get this thing published, having no background in book publishing and everything. I was, out there, trying to figure out how to get it done, and was able to get it out there. But yeah, I mean, right now I'm just trying to get the energy up to start. I hate to use the word sequel, but there is going to be another book about Tom Sullivan, and when you read the book, as you've read it, there is a way to continue his story.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's something next year I'm going to start writing that.
One last take here. We'll combine the fire with the entertainment. Let's talk about, which everybody talks about with military movies and law enforcement movies, or even doctors in emergency rooms or surgery. Tell me your thoughts on movies about fire service. I mean, you and I have talked about this before, the people who watch the shows like Chicago Fire or Backdraft or Rescue Me with Dennis Leary. I mean, we know it's Hollywood, but give me your take on that.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, we've talked about this a number of times, and the fact that we've dabbled on both sides of that,
Right.
I guess we might have a better understanding than a lot of people, but Hollywood is
Right.
Hollywood, and they have a certain, mission. It's to encapsulate or capture rather the viewer. And so you can't go into a fire and not come out, with your makeup all messed up. You know what I mean?
Right,
It's like,
right.
so Hollywood, they have to do it a certain way so that, they keep the ladies' heartbeats going with the good looking guys. And,
Right.
shows like Chicago Fire, I watched, maybe one or two of them when it first came out,
Right.
and, that was the end of that. I think that there's more cop shows that are maybe more realistic. I was a big fan of the television series NYPD Blue.
Right. Of course. That
And
was a great show.
I
Yeah.
thought that was a phenomenal look into the life of a cop detective. If I had to say on the fire side, the show that I think is the most accurately represents the fire service, it would be
Right.
Rescue Me.
I was going
Yeah.
to say that. I love that show. You and I have talked about that. Yes, Rescue Me. I was wondering if you're going to say that, and it was on. I was going to say I wonder if you're going to be talking about the show that I've never been in the fire service, but having been on the fringe of it, yes, Rescue Me certainly is. To me,
Yeah,
a pretty good show.
Yeah, both good and bad. I mean, they touch on a lot of the dysfunction that has been a large part of the fire service. Not so much
Right.
now. I mean, things have changed. There's not the cowboy craziness anymore
Sure.
that used to take place. But I used to have a bunch of people used to say to me when that show came out, it's not really like that, is it? And I'm like, yeah, it's pretty much just like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that show probably out of all the shows and movies I've seen is probably the most accurate. Nowadays, there's a lot more accountability.
Sure.
So
sure.
you
I think
can't-
times have
yeah,
changed. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't be
That's
doing
like how
the
I see
things
it.
that they, what's that?
Yeah. No, that's like to see the show Southland. That to
Yeah.
me was that show about law enforcement. A lot of elements in that are pretty right on, spot on. Of course, it's it has to be Hollywood a certain way, but it was to me it was one of my favorite shows. When that show was done, a lot of those things that I saw that's pretty much how some things go. They don't do that now, and there's a lot more accountability, a lot less of the
Right.
joking around, or a lot less of the things that they were doing that certainly weren't sometimes in protocol. But yeah, Rescue Me, shows like that, certainly to me was a good show. So
Yeah. Another good show that I thought was well done was Third Watch, if you remember that back on ABC.
I do remember that show. I do not watch that show, but I heard others say that was a pretty decent show.
Yeah, they did a pretty good portrayal of that. Was a mix of police, fire, and EMS.
Right.
But they were good, and they did a couple of shows because that show was in production during 9/11.
Right.
And a lot of the consultants they used on that show were actual cops and firemen, and that were involved in that. So they did a couple of special shows back then, specifically highlighting 9/11, and that show was good. If I would say Rescue Me had a comedic element to it, which was fine.
Theory. Yeah.
Yeah, but Third Watch was also well done too. Those were the two
Yeah.
I'd say. Yeah.
And people need to understand that most of these shows, whether it be a movie about the military, law enforcement, EMTs, firemen, whatever it may be, a lot of them have advisors. There are advisors on the show. There are people that are on the show that are advising whether or not the producers or the director use everything that's being advised to them because they have to Hollywood it up a little bit. But, most if not all these shows have somebody on the set who is a retired or current person who's a first responder or in the military, and they're doing their best to advise and say, hey, don't do it that way. Don't hold a hose this way, or don't hold a gun that way. And it's not always taking our advice. They say, well, for the camera, I need it to be done this way, but thank you for the advice. I'll hit you up on the next one. So I think people need to understand that, these movies do have people on it that are advisors that are from the field.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's true. It only goes so far. So sometimes you say that the writers and directors, they want a certain thing in there, and that's the way it's going to be no matter what.
Right. So hopefully when your book gets made into a movie, then you get to be the advisor of it, and you could be the co-producer on it, or whoever picks it up and makes it into a movie. And this way it's done right, or as right as you can be for Hollywood. So let's just say that.
Right.
So
yeah, well, so if you know anybody who's looking at any showrunners out there, let me know.
Yeah, exactly. So where can somebody get your book, The Bell Tolls? Where can they pick this book up?
It's on Amazon, of course. If you just put my name in there in the title, it'll pop right up. And right now I only have it on Apple Books as a download. So yeah, that's where you can find it.
Right. I got my copy on Amazon. So and I missed it when Jimmy and I got together in Connecticut on my last East Coast go around. I forgot to have him sign this. So next time he's going to have to sign this for me.
Definitely. Thank you for the support.
Absolutely. So those of you listening, it's James DiNapoli. The last name is DiNapoli.
Put my name in the title. It'll bring it right up.
Absolutely. And yeah, The Bell Tolls, great book. I've read it. It's fantastic. If you all get a chance to do that. But Jimmy, one of my best friends in the world, and somebody I've worked with together a long time and still will be working with. Thank you for being on. It's been fantastic.
Yes. My pleasure.
And,
thank you for having me. And the show's doing great. We're building momentum and got a lot of great guests on and coming on, and we're going to keep going.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So kick back and real people, real stories. Stay tuned for the next episode. And if you haven't seen the previous ones, have a listen or have a watch on YouTube, Spotify, iHeart, and Apple Podcasts. Thank you very much. Kick back.
Thank you, Scott. Okay.